Hello, I'm Chrissy Seaton and welcome to class number 12 this is, and we're continuing on with the fifth gate, and the fifth gate is called the personal traits desired by God. I'm sorry, there's a jet flying over which you probably can hear right now. Right. Now, we're on chapter 4 of the fifth gate, and this one speaks about the trait of modesty, which is chapter 4. But before I proceed any further, I would just like to remind you all that there is an opportunity for you to donate to Unite to Study, and that is you're able to do that on the Unite to Study website, and there is a section there where you can make donations. Now, they can be in remembrance of somebody, they may be to sponsor a class, etc. There's a number of options that you have, and you can choose whichever one suits you. So please don't forget to do that, because it goes to a good cause. Right, now the first gate, as I said, is the trait of modesty, and I'm just trying to a little glitch here somewhere. I've got something on, oh, there we go. I'll just get rid of that. There we go. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about in this trait of modesty is our personal modesty, in a sense, this relates to. And we want to discuss the fact that even when we're in the privacy of our own home, and even in our own private space within our own home, regardless of what our activities are, it's still a requirement for us to maintain that protocol of privacy. It's something that we should practice at doing. So it's not just about when we're out in public, but it is also in relation to the privacy of our own home. We are obligated to be modest in all we do. It's a trait that we need to be conscious of, and we also need to understand that we're in Hashem's watchful presence 24/7, and also under his divine providence 24/7. So that never stops. We're always in the radar, so to speak, or under God's radar. So it is best policy for us to always maintain modesty in all that we do. That is always the best policy. And just for example, we're looking at things tonight, in particular the obvious, and that is how our clothing, our modesty in dress, and that would be the accepted modesty of the accepted dress that's the custom in the community or the country where we live. And we're asked to be modest in our behaviour, and that applies to in the home as well, in the workplace, general social things, sport, etc., all those sorts of things. So whatever platform we're working in, or wherever we are located, or whatever our activity is, modesty again must prevail. And particularly, a very important part of that modesty is our speech, that we, in other words, think before we speak, that we're not going to hurt someone's feelings, and, a behaviour of kindness and refined truthfulness must be prevalent in all that we are speaking about. So our words have an impact that we need to be very conscious about. And one of the things here, I just wanted to read this to you. It's on page, just before we go any further, it says that humility and boldness. So there is a sort of a difference. There's a parallel here of a difference, for want of a better expression. There are two separate concepts, it says, and they are reconciled as follows. Now, with humility and boldness, they need not be contradictory, and this is how it's described. When it comes to a person's individual concerns, he should be humble and willing to compromise. But with regard to his divine service, that is, in the service of Hashem, we should be standing proud and boldly assert his rights, God's rights, and remain unfazed in the face of any and all who try to hinder us. So there is that balance of humility in all that we are, but of boldness. And it says that, you know, we are to have the boldness of a leopard. And that certainly applies to when we're doing the will of Hashem, when we're doing God's will. So, but we must always be conscious of the fact that our modesty is always the best policy, and it does become involved very deeply with our behaviours, and we are to develop a refined behaviour. And with regard to our speech, I think the thing that we should concentrate on is that if we're in doubt about something, it's best just to be silent. You can sometimes be in a situation where you think, I don't know what to say, and sometimes just saying nothing is the best way to go about. And when we're exercising any dialogue or any exchange of conversation, we should always make an effort to be favourable and positive in our speech, and certainly favourable in our speech about others, that we don't cast aspersions on them or say something that might be misunderstood. So when we humility, but I'll just go to the next slide. So we've got here when humility versus boldness, and this is a continuation of what I just read about us having the boldness of a leopard. So Proverbs chapter 22 verse 4 clearly says that the result of humility is fear of Hashem, wealth, honour and life. So we fear Hashem firstly, wealth, honour and life are secondary to that. And the commentary related to this verse says recognition of his own significance, in recognition of one's own insignificance leads a person to humility and to the fear of God. In turn, God will reward him for his success. So that's the rationale behind that. And it goes on further and says that this transfers over into our lifestyle as a Noahide. So how does that, what is it that transfers over? Well, here are some examples that we can look at. And one of those things is being satisfied and at peace with our station in life. We're not all going to be rock stars or fabulously wealthy, or we may not all suffer excellent health every day of our life. We may struggle finding work at times. There's all manner of things that will be different for each and every one of us. But the main thing is to be satisfied with what we have in life already. They're blessings we already have. We're also to be very conscious and active when it comes to the principles of decency, integrity and truthfulness to others. These are very important things. So it doesn't matter whether it's in our private life, family life, or our work life, business, etc. So that human decency, integrity in what we do, and being truthful. They are three big pillars that modesty is based on. We're also to exercise discretion at all times in all the things that we are doing and the people we're dealing with, the situations that may arise that we have to deal with. And another important thing also I think we have to remind ourselves about is that we must have a wisdom to know when to withdraw or proceed from a situation or or whatever it is that's happening, whether it be a discussion, that we need to know that, do I continue with this or should I step back and withdraw from it? So in other words, we need to know our limitations and the limitations of the situation that we're dealing with at the time. You know, what is the possibility of a favourable outcome? So one of the things that we know is that how we present ourselves as a package, so to speak, that determines how others will perceive us. It determines whether they think that we're wise and thoughtful or are we stupid and foolish. So our presentation tells people a lot. And sometimes we don't have to open our mouth for that to be obvious. So I'll just move along now. Oh, just one other thing. I just wanted to qualify something. When I said here principles of decency, integrity and truthfulness, there is just a little side note here when it comes to truthfulness. And the example I'll give is that sometimes it's best not to be truthful. In other words, it's best not to say anything when there's a chance it may embarrass or offend someone. So we have to be careful about that, and just sometimes it's better to say nothing, or it is just have to be cautious about how we say something, or that we don't offend someone. And we should bear that in mind. I have 3 sons, and I've given them a lifelong lesson. And I always say to them, now look, if at some stage in life your wife comes to you and asks you, does this dress make her look too fat? You are to look her in the eye with most sincerity and say, absolutely not, my dear, you look beautiful. And I say to them, even if she knows perhaps you're not being totally truthful with her, she'll appreciate the effort you made to make her feel better. So just keep that in mind if you're a man. So we'll go on to our next slide now. And we also have a turn my page over here. This is moving into chapter 5, where it talks about the influence of our environment, but in relation to rebuking another person. Now, in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20, it says, one who walks with the wise will become wise, while one who associates with fools will suffer. So how does that relate to what we're talking about here now? Well, let's have a look at some things here. One of the things that we need to be aware of is distancing ourselves from what we would call bad influences. Now, that bad influence could be in the form of people within our community, or it could be a particular group or a particular individual. So what are perceived to be bad influences is not something that we should make ourselves readily available to. It is not going to have a good effect upon us. Eventually, it erodes us. No matter how strong we are, if there are people who have a bad influence in and around us, we should avoid them. Our influence upon others, on the other hand, we in turn must be respectful towards others, be honourable towards people, be a righteous person, show integrity and principles. We are told also that it is absolutely forbidden to hate someone, to hate others. We're not to do that. That's just not acceptable. And we also need to assist, or at least try to assist others to follow the Torah of God. If we can influence them in a positive and non-invasive type of way, we do need to answer their questions truthfully if they ask things. If we can't answer it, or we're not sure of the correct answer, then certainly we can find out for them and seek advice from someone to help us with that. We're also obligated to differentiate between a sin that is not impacting upon others versus what we would say is an extremely evil person or extremely evil group of people. So an example would be, if it's a sin between an individual and God and it's not impacting or impeaching upon anybody else's well-being, that's a different matter. But when it is a sin that is affecting others, be it a family, workplace, the public, etc., then there is a distinct difference there. And they are things that have to be rectified. In fact, it may be that the correct authorities have to rectify that or correct that problem. So there is a distinction there. In the 7 gates of righteous knowledge, and I've referenced this in the reference list at the back, on page 109 to 111, it basically sums up by saying that 2 wrongs don't make a right. We've often probably heard that expression. So 2 of you doing the wrong thing isn't going to rectify the situation for either person. And the other thing to be most careful about is not to bear grudges. So I just want to read a couple of things here. It says that we have an obligation for every person not to hate others. It's forbidden to hate without reason. However, we should not hate a person, but instead we should endeavour to return the person to the path that is correct according to Torah. It goes on and then says, distance oneself from a sinner is advisable. One should not harbour any hatred towards them, because hatred is also an evil trait that comes from the evil inclination. So that's why we must not pursue that track. It leads to disputes, fighting, bigotry, and many other bad things. One is, however, obligated to differentiate, and this comes back to what I said in the beginning, between people who sin between themselves and God and do little or no harm to others versus extremely evil people who cause harm to society. Now, a little footnote here explains to us that Jews are always obligated and commanded to love their fellow Jew. Gentiles aren't. We're not actually commanded to love each other. However, it does serve as a lesson for pious behaviour. In other words, we should develop good relationships between each other and help fellow Noahites. Let's go on to the next slide here. Okay. Now, our influence upon others. There's a correct and a commandment for us to establish a correct and righteous society, and that is because we actually have an obligation also to set up courts of justice. But just let's look at commandment to establish a correct and righteous society. So we have an obligation, entwined within that, there is an obligation for us to rebuke those who violate the universal laws, which are the 7 Noahide laws, especially if it will influence that person to correct their behaviour. And also it is advisable if the person or the people you're talking to are known to you, so they're not just strangers off the street that you've never known before. So we've got some guidelines here about how to rebuke someone, and I imagine all of us would have had to rebuke someone at some stage, whether it be in the family, home situation or work or whatever, and it is done in privacy. You don't do it in front of an audience. You always keep your voice calm and speak quietly, and certainly very sincerely. Now, people know when your speech isn't sincere. They can tell. So that sincerity must be there for the good and the welfare of that person that you're speaking with, and also for the future world, the good of the world. Now, what you wanting, because you're rebuking that person in a kind manner, the reason why you're doing it is that you want to correct them so that they have a future in the world to come, not because you just feel like you want them to do what you think's right. There's got to be a sincere understanding of why you're doing it. Now, it may be that they have some behaviour, or there's been some action or something by them that is really going to jeopardise their future in the world to come. So again, we come back to this obligation to rebuke that person with kindness, love and patience and in privacy. All that communication that you have with that person during this process of rebuking, that's to remain completely private between you and the other person involved. That's not something you come out and broadcast later. It's the only exception to that would be if that behaviour was related to a dangerous and reportable act. Therefore, you may have to notify the police or something. Now, those who ignore, and some people do, some people will ignore gentle, sincere rebukes. Now, let's just suppose you're dealing with someone, one particular person, and you've tried at least 3 times to gently, in the kindest possible way, rebuke them and explain to them the correct Torah path, and they don't want to know about it. In actual fact, they're threatening to hit you if you say it again or something like that. Then you are released then from any further obligation to try to rebuke or correct their ways. So in other words, you're released from that obligation. You're not to, there's a limit to how far you can go with someone, and how far you can proceed. So just referring back to here in the book, The 7 Gates of Righteous Knowledge, it says, if he accepts the rebuke, it is good. If not, rebuke him a second and third time. One is obligated to rebuke a colleague who does wrong until the latter strikes him and tells him, I will not listen. Well, let's hope it doesn't get to that stage. Or a similar statement that implies that he will no longer tolerate being rebuked. When one sees that the sinner is not accepting the rebuke at all, then there is no obligation to continue or try harder. So that's written in the Divine Code on page 111. And certainly when you have to speak to a colleague or a workmate, you shouldn't, well, regardless of who you're speaking with, it should never be done harshly or in an embarrassing way. It's to be done with a great deal of tact and sincerity. And that person that you have to correct for whatever reason should not should not feel bad about it, should not feel embarrassed or humiliated. So it's got to be done in a very sensitive way. And some people are very good at doing that. Some people are quite gifted in being able to take someone aside and correct them over something without it feeling like you've been corrected. There's some people are just gifted with that. Now, go down. So, I might go on to the next one here now. We've talked about rebuking. Now, we're coming up to this topic now where it says about loving and respecting others. So, this is bringing us into actually chapter 6 of the 5th gate. And just to start off with, you've probably all by now heard of Hillel, a famous sage, who his golden rule was, that which is hateful to you, do not do to another person. So you couldn't put it any better than that, and that's why it's called a golden rule, I think. And we take a look in Leviticus chapter 19 verse 18, where it says, you shall not take revenge and you shall not bear a grudge against the member of your people. You shall love your fellow as yourself. I am Hashem. Okay, so let's take a look at that. It really means that we're not to degrade someone. We're not to humiliate someone or cause embarrassment, cause their face to turn red. And remember Hillel's golden rule. How would I feel if this was happening to me? What effect would this have if this was me? So there's a few things we need to be aware about. First of all, we're forbidden to curse or really speak evil about another person. That's just not applicable. We can't do that. We're not to degrade or deliberately embarrass someone, as I mentioned before. Certainly not to take revenge or bear a grudge against someone. And don't mistreat or disrespect our own self. Now, that is something that we often don't pay attention to. And why must we do that? Why must we be respectful and not mistreat ourselves? It is because the image of God is within us. So we're the custodian of that image of God that dwells within us. So we have a moral and physical obligation to respect that, not bring shame upon it. And we also are required to help others without applying conditions. Now, there's lots of examples we could give here. It might mean not like, okay, I loaned you my lawnmower this week, you have to loan me your whippersnipper next week because I did you a favour. We're not to help others when we think there's got to be a favour returned. And, you know, we do come across people in life who are like this. Oh, I did you a good turn, now you've got to do me a good turn. Well, no, we're not to behave like that. If we can help another, we should be doing it without any consideration to the fact that, that's a favour, I'll tick that one up in my little book. I'll call that one in at a later date if I need to. Certainly it is good if people can mutually help each other. That is the ideal, but it should not be done with thinking, I did 3 favours for that person last week and they've not done anything for me this week. We just can't behave in that manner. Now, that's taking revenge. I think we've discussed that. Bear with me. Okay, so now we're going to look at, still in the same chapter, the principles of human decency. Now, let's take a closer look. So, human decency, mutual respect and honesty, they truly are the foundations for what is an upright, harmonious and stable society, not to mention the ramifications for trade and economy. So when you have an upright, mutually respectful and decent society, then within that grows a healthy trade and a healthy economy. So there's got to be integrity involved with all we do. There has to be truthfulness involved. There has to be a sense of responsibility we have for our neighbour, a sense of responsibility we have for being truthful. All these things are what makes society harmonious. And we could look at an example of this about human decency. And the first one that comes to mind is the story of Joseph, and that's in Genesis chapter 50, verse 21. And what do we see there? Well, bear in mind that Joseph's brothers abandoned him. They sold him into slavery, basically. But when they appear, and down the track, as the story goes, of course you would know, I don't have to tell you, he comes face to face with the brothers who did this to him. So Joseph didn't take revenge. He didn't become cruel in his dealings with his brother. What he said was that he would help them. He would take care of their young children. And so this is it's a humbling lesson when you think about what Joseph went through, and yet he was able to say that do not fear, I will sustain you and your children, comforted them and spoke, heartfelt to them. So that's a great lesson. We can go and read about that in the Bible, of course. But now what about Aaron? Let's take a look at what happened there. Well, Aaron had a way of bringing people back together again, I guess. He had a way of mending bridges when people had arguments or discontent had arose. And so what he used to do was go to the one party and say, so-and-so is really sorry for what they did to you. He begs your forgiveness. Will you forgive? And of course, it's hard to say, no, I won't forgive, isn't it? But then he would go to the other person then and say, so-and-so is sorry, and he would like your forgiveness. And, in a roundabout way, he got the two parties to come together and reconcile. So we should look at those examples, and I've given the passages there. So it's a wise act to exercise judgment and peacefulness, to forgive without holding any conditions or grudges, and we're to have a love and a respect for all of creation. So every part of creation, be it humankind or other, we all have a place and a job to do, and we all have a level of respect. We all need to be treated with respect. And so that's why I decided to put that big green tick there. So, to here. Go. Now, something that we have to be very, very careful about. Now, we're moving into chapter 7 now, and it says the care that a wise and righteous person must take in speaking. So I guess out of all these things we keep coming back to speech. It's very important. And we all need to remind ourselves about this. You think how many times you speak in the course of a day, either when you're at work, even when you're just at home. Our mouths never stop going. I mean, some people are great talkers. They talk a lot. Other people perhaps listen more than they talk. But regardless, none of us can get through a day without speaking, without using our speech for one reason or another. So here's some things that we need to think about. And that is that always be wise about and careful with our speech. That is what we as righteous individuals should concentrate on, that we think before we speak. You know, who am I in the presence of? Is this going to impact someone adversely? It's not my, you know, you don't want to, it's not your intention to offend anyone. How should I frame this? Should I mention it at all? Maybe I won't talk about it today. There's all manner of things that we consider when we speak. But we must start with what's actually forbidden in terms of our speech, and that is gossip and spreading tales. So there's no negotiating that. There's no excuse for it. There's no reason for it. It's embarrassing, and also along with that, or separate from that, any attempt to embarrass another person, telling tales about them, even if they seem funny, innocent tales. If it's going to embarrass someone else, don't do it. Just don't do it. It's not your prerogative to embarrass another. We also are not to listen to gossip or tale bearing. You know, tittle-tattling. Oh, did you hear this about so-and-so? Oh, you know, it's a titillating little bit of information. No, it's not. It's gossip. And we certainly shouldn't use evil speech. That's outright speaking very badly about another person. You just can't do that. It's very interesting to note here, and something that we probably don't always think about. We tend to think that the gossiper is the one who's doing the talking, the one who's telling the tale is the one who's sinning. But are you aware that if we're in there listening, we're committing an even bigger sin? And we're told that that's because because we're there listening, we're enabling and encouraging that talk or tale or gossip to continue. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not, the gossip or the tale. It's just that we were there allowing that to continue. And, you know, I can tell you a little example that I had quite a few years ago. It was, you know, I was a lot younger than I am now and less experienced, but I was exposed to, I'm not exposed, but these people were talking about someone all the time, one person in particular, and it actually destroyed my relationship with them, because I couldn't continue to associate with them. And the hardest thing I ever had to do was to actually put my hand up, and I can still remember it as though it happened yesterday, and say, please, I can't listen to this anymore. I don't want to be in the same room while you're talking about this matter. And I got up and left the room. And it was a really tense and awkward time for me, because I felt uncomfortable. I knew that the other people I was sure they were angry with me, but they certainly weren't happy with me. And anyway, the upshot of it all was I gained some friends out of that, and I lost some out of that situation. But you know what? The next time I had to do it, it was nowhere near as hard. And if you have very strong principles, then there's every good chance that you've had to earn that strength of principle through a delicate situation. You've grown through it. And it's not something I wish I'd ever had to go through, but having been through it, I feel I can offer you the advice to say that it's not pretty the first time, but then do you stay there and keep listening and enabling that? You're giving approval by being in the presence of that sort of talk. And it's very, very bad. And I don't regret the decision I made. I don't regret having taken the action I did. It was difficult, but it got better. And I guess you get more comfortable with saying to people, look, you know, don't do that. You know, sometimes you just can't graciously get up and walk out of a room without it being noticed. And if you can, that's great. If not, if you've really just got to put a stop to it because it's interrupting other more important things that are to be taking place, then you do actually have to put your hand up and say, oh, sorry, not in my, don't speak that way in my presence. It's offensive and it's not the correct thing to do for another person. So there we go. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? The other thing that, I'll just do this over. One more thing is that, as I said, we have to distance ourselves from gossip because it does enable that evil inclination to run rampant. And but there's a couple of other little things that we need to take into account here. And one of them is, you know, certainly not goes without saying you don't participate in it. And certainly don't show any approval, even if it is the truth. And down inside you might be thinking, oh, yes. Don't, just try and keep that poker face. Don't show approval for the tales of the gossip. And another thing that is a common mistake people make in a situation like this is that they attempt to defend the person who is being criticised or tales being told about. And we're told quite clearly, don't speak favourably about a person in the presence of their enemies, because all you're doing is offering them an opportunity to counterattack or to correct what you've said, to overrule what you've said. So that's adding fuel to the fire. And there's an expression called dust of Lashon Hara. So don't succumb to that. Now, what does that actually mean? And I'm just going to read a little bit from the book, Seven Gates of Righteous Knowledge. A pious person will avoid gossip and Lashon Hara. One should not even be involved with the dust of Lashon Hara. This is the expression the sages use to describe negative implications that are spoken about someone without relating anything specifically, such as, and here's the example, who will tell so-and-so that he should always act the way he is acting now? Or, don't talk about so-and-so. I don't want to say what happened. Don't tempt me. Or, you know, similar type of expressions, you know, I'm not saying anything, but don't bring the person's name up. That is what's called the dust of Lashon Hara. The expression's beautiful, isn't it? The action's not. The other thing that we need to be careful of is also praising a person loudly in public. Now, that sounds like a counterproductive thing when we want to praise someone because they've done a good deed or something like that. So what does this mean? Well, Proverbs 27, chapter 27, verse 14. And it says, I did have it written here somewhere. Okay. So King Solomon says not to thank or praise someone loudly in public. Now, why is that? Well, I've got it here. It's having a bit of trouble. There we go, I've got it now. It says, if one blesses his friend loudly from early in the morning, it will be considered a curse to him. Now, I want to just read the commentary on that. And it says, one who ostentatiously blesses someone's generosity is harming his benefactor because others will try to take advantage of him. So, you know what? Not one syllable is ever wasted in the teachings of Torah. Not one syllable. Everything is there for a reason. So now we know why. So I've never ceased to be amazed at how the wisdom just shines through. It's just so beautiful. So where am I up to now? I've done that. Okay, so we're just about at the end now. All right. Now, one of the other things that we're told to be very careful of is to avoid being frivolous and profane. Now, we've probably all come across someone that we know that does this, or we've done it ourselves at some times. Look, none of us are perfect. None of us can really stand up and say, oh, I haven't been guilty of this or I haven't been guilty of that. It's something that is easy to happen, being frivolous with our words and our behaviour, and certainly there are people who are just plain profane. Pardon the rhyming pun there, but so, and also avoid flattery because it can be false or deceiving. Now, I want to just distinguish flattery is different to complimenting someone on a task well achieved, or they've executed a job at a high level of competence. These are two different things. Flattery does, you know, if you think flattery can be very flippant and flamboyant, but commenting and commending someone on a task that they've executed with excellence, that's different again. So just don't get the two confused. But even when you're complimenting and commending someone for a task well done, it's probably going to be done in privacy. And you're going to say, you know, I particularly found the way you handle such and such, or the way you organise this has been a major improvement in the system, or something like that. So don't think of it as flippant, flamboyant flattery and constructive commendation. They're two different things. So to summarise it all, because we are at the end of our lesson now, think before we speak. Use our speech to promote and encourage righteous conduct amongst others. So always be careful. Our words can be healing and they can be harmful, all in the same sentence times. And guarding our speech, it is an obligation and a way of life for Noahide. So we need to embrace that, and we need to understand that it is important that we do, how shall I say, we ration our speech at times. So put a yardstick or something on it. So there is a list of references, and there's quite a few here, but they're all there to follow up and read if you so desire, particularly the biblical references, and they will all have some bearing, or they refer to what we have talked about in this class. So just before we close the session, it is, we're well and truly halfway through, more than halfway through. This is class session 12. I envisage there'll be about another 6. It was scheduled to go for 20 lessons. It may, but I'm thinking it'll probably be closer to 18, and I'll speak to Rabbi Yossi about that. The other thing is just to remind you once again, there is an opportunity to donate to the Unite to Study. I urge you to go to that page and look at the opportunities and the causes that you can assist with there. And I will close off this meeting now. I'm just going to